Hey guys, Peter here to tell you about the latest from Arch Enemy Deceivers, out August 12th on Century Media Records. The album has 11 tracks, 45 minutes in length, and this the band's 11th full-length studio album. They are a Swedish melodic death metal band. As far as the design goes, this album is as good as it gets, considering that half of the material has been released as singles, and that could become a problem once you get to listen to the record, because you feel like you've heard these songs already. That novelty of playing an album for the first time maybe is a little bit out of the window. Now, how they designed the record takes a little bit of that novelty and puts it back into the experience. The album starts off with 3 singles. Then it offers you 2 songs that you could consider new material, then 2 more singles, and then again finishing off with new material. It comes in blocks, but it works well because the blocks that you're familiar with blend in perfectly with the blocks that you're not. So there's a sense of continuity, there's a sense of progression, and everything becomes super fresh. The songs that you've never heard sound fresh. The songs that you've heard already still sound fresh because of the way the album balances itself out with a structure and design like this. Perfect for a record that had the backdrop of, like I said, having 5 songs released as singles out of an 11-track record. Now, as far as the soundscape is concerned, I feel like this is an album that shows a different side of Arch Enemy, or at least it has a different backdrop or a different starting point than some of the previous albums. This to me feels more like a classic heavy metal record at the start, at the foundation, and then obviously you see the melodic death metal sound, the traditional Arch Enemy sound coming into the forefront, and the roots being heavy metal. The branches on this tree are definitely death metal, melodic death metal. But that backdrop, that starting point, changes your perception of the songs and definitely your perception of the album. Now, not every song has the same amount of that traditional sound in the backdrop, but every single song has some sort of representation of it, either be in the solos, in a riff, in a melody, in a harmony, in the way the vocals come across. There is classic heavy metal, even power metal at times, represented from beginning to end throughout the entire listening experience. The amounts vary, the amounts change from song to song. That allows the record to be more dynamic, but it definitely gives the album a different sensation, a different feeling. It doesn't have that grinding you down, thick, heavy, melodic death metal sound that perhaps is the traditional core sound of Arch Enemy. It's still there, but it doesn't rely on it consistently from start to finish. It has more of a different push. It has more of a melodic drive. It feels a little bit brighter. It feels a little bit lighter. It's out of the dungeon. This allows the overall experience to be more epic. This album sounds and feels epic, larger than life, very robust, not using heaviness to create size, rather using the melody to expand the footprint of the album, of the sound, of the experience that it gives. Now, within that sound, you have to talk about drums, and of course, you have to talk about the guitars. The drums on this album sound phenomenal. You sometimes see records like this losing a little bit of power, a little bit of steam here and there as far as the drums are concerned. The drums are not super consistent from beginning to end, but they go where the songs demand them to go. When the tracks need heaviness, the drums are super heavy, super powerful, grounding the album, grounding the songs, pushing them forward, having that momentum behind them, that robust nature that they need. When the songs drop to a more melodic approach, they take the foot off the gas pedal ever so slightly. Not completely off, because the heaviness is still there, but ever so slightly removing a little bit, easing off a little bit, allowing the guitars to push themselves more into the forefront, more into the eyesight of the listener, making the songs feel that they have that epic nature to them, that classic heavy metal, power metal drive to them. You're going to see that in and out as you progress throughout the entire album. But the drum sound is super consistent as far as the quality, not necessarily consistent as far as the execution. Now, on the guitar side, what is that not to like as far as this record is concerned? I want to start off with the solos. The solos on this album, the solo sections on this album are phenomenal. They have growth, they expand, they contract, they have melody, they have explosion, they have heaviness, they have all the different sides of Arch Enemy. The history of Arch Enemy, sound-wise, is extremely well represented in this album, in the solo sections, from beginning to end. If you were just to take out the solos out of this record and listen to them, I think you can see the growth and you can see the history of the band well represented across every single one of them. Now, outside of the solos, when it comes to the melodies, the riffs, the transitions, really well done. This album is a guitar-driven album. And that's not to say that the previous Arch Enemy records are not guitar-driven. I feel like they all are to a certain extent. But because of that heavy metal, that classic heavy metal, even hints of power metal backdrop or starting point, if you will, that this album has in its sound, that guitar push becomes a little bit more predominant. It's easier to detect, it's easier to see, it's easier to understand. And that's why I feel like this album is going to be an easy album to digest for the listener, because it doesn't have as much thickness to it. It still has heaviness, it still has brutality, it still has the melody that moves really well, intertwining with that brutality and heaviness, but overall it feels overly simplified because the starting point is one that it doesn't complicate things. So it's an album that pushes the guitars into the forefront, allows them to be the calling card, allows them to be the driver of the sound, the driver of the experience, the sonic conductor, if you will, of everything this album offers musically. Then vocally, you have Alyssa, and she is phenomenal on this album. If there's one thing I would change, is I would like to see a little bit more of her clean vocals, because they're phenomenal, they're outstanding, they add quality, and they match perfectly with that classic heavy metal sound that this album has, with that power metal backdrop or hints of power metal backdrop that this album offers here and there. So having a little bit more of her clean vocals, I think would have made this album even bigger, even brighter, even larger. I wasn't as much of a fan of some of the spoken word that they used. It works well, but it takes a little bit of steam, and I think this album should be all about steam, should be all about power, being robust, being epic, being larger than life. So I think using the harsh vocals and perhaps dropping a little bit more often some clean vocals here and there would have made the album even bigger. But still, an outstanding performance by her from start to end. This is not just another Arch Enemy album, and it's hard for a band that's released 10 albums previously to this one to kind of reinvent themselves and release something new. Now, some fans will say that they want what it's not broken. They want the same old Arch Enemy album in and album out. I think that would be quite boring. So you try to go outside the box. There are bands out there that have released albums recently that are so outside the box that you can't even see the box anymore. And I don't think you want that either. You have to keep some of your DNA in there while adding new elements or new items that become new to your sound and allow you to expand your footprint and expand what you can do as a band going forward. I feel like this album does just that. It still is an Arch Enemy record. It still has all of the Arch Enemy DNA in it, but then it offers you some new elements that you haven't seen before that come in a different package, in a different format, that allow the band to be a little bit more dynamic, that allows the band to be a little bit more creative, and creating a sound and an experience that comes with it that's going to feel refreshing to the listener. The perfect combo, if you ask me. As far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with The Watcher. This track is magnificent. It has that, when I was listening to this song, I was like, is this a power metal song? Because the riffage is very power metal-like, classic heavy metal, power metal within that arena, if you will. It has great sound. It still has the Arch Enemy heaviness to it. That's not gone. That heaviness is still there, specifically in the verses. This is a very Jekyll and Hyde track because in the verses it's very traditional Arch Enemy, very heavy, very brutal, thunderous even at points with the drums and guitars creating this chunky, heavy volume that moves forward. But then once you get into the chorus brightens up. The chorus sounds like a power metal song, sounds like a classic heavy metal song, perhaps more power metal than classic heavy metal. It just has a lot of brightness to it. The only thing grounding the track is Alyssa's harsh vocals. They're still there. They're still creating a sense of continuity, but the sound is very different. So that creates that Jekyll and Hyde process that works really well for this track. That chorus is phenomenal. The reason why this song stands out is because of it, because of the sound that it has, the melody that it creates, and how it all comes together. It feels very interesting from that perspective, and it's going to perk your ears immediately because you haven't really heard anything like it up until this point on the album. Now, the solo section is an absolute trip. it builds, it morphs, it grows, it adds elements to it. The way it starts, the way it finishes are two completely different things. It feels like there's two completely different tracks at that point, representing really well that Jekyll and Hyde process that you're going to find between the verses and the chorus itself. Then the song closes off with these this 80s vibe synthesizers that then bleed into the track that comes next, Poisoned Arrow. So these two tracks are two new songs, if you will, squeezed in between singles, and they're interconnected because the way one ends is the way the next one starts. And once you get through those synths, the sound starts to evolve, the song starts to grow until you get into that more traditional, heavier sound, slow moving, traditional, heavier sound that works really well. A more methodic track. It doesn't have that bombastic nature to it. It just feels like it moves slowly but surely. It takes you along. It has hints of a power ballad. That's how it feels. It's not. This song is not a ballad, but when you break it down and you take some of the heavier elements from it, it really comes across as a power ballad. And that's really interesting because you're coming from a song that had a little bit of a power metal vibe in the chorus, moving into a track that gives you the sensation of a power ballad. Perfect transition. The two songs are intertwined because the ending of one bleeds into the start of the other. So these two tracks almost come as a combo. Very hard to separate them from one another because I feel like one is the perfect sequence to what the other had in store for you. So it's a really interesting track from that perspective, both musically and vocally. It has a lot to offer. Once again, the solos are phenomenal. They're like candy raindrops. The way they're coming down, the way they feel. The solo section is phenomenal on this track. Really emphasizes all of the beauty and sound and melody and vocal approach that the song offers. Last but not least, one last time, this is probably one more traditional track from an Arch Enemy point of view, at least in the verses. Very robust, very heavy, very brutal from start to finish. The verses never really change. That approach stays very consistent. What changes in the song is how you perceive certain elements of this track. There is some spoken word bridges. There is obviously the chorus that is different, that has a different dynamic, that feels a little bit bigger, that has more, it still has the traditional Arch Enemy sound, but it feels slightly bigger, slightly more robust, considering how the verses come along. And it's a song that's very consistent from what you get musically and vocally from one section to the other, but it has interesting dynamics, or it has interesting ripples, like the spoken word, that breaks the dynamic ever so often. So it allows the song to have more of a movement up and down, to have jolts within it and not feel as stagnant as it perhaps it would be if you didn't introduce these different pieces to it to make the song break apart and expand itself a little bit more. This is it, Arch Enemy Deceivers, out August 12th on Century Media Records. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Use the comment section below. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.